Hey there! Welcome back to the Homemade Haven. Today we are making some Crockpot apple butter. My mom has an apple tree in her yard and it was hanging full of apples and we needed to do something with them, so we picked a bunch the other day, probably about 3 pounds worth, and we're going to turn them into some apple butter for the fall and winter so we can enjoy them in just a couple months. I guess we can enjoy them now too, but it'll be nice in the winter months. Please ignore the kitchen. It is a mess. We are living in this tight space here and we have yet to do the dishes this morning and our breakfast is still on the stove over there, so just look around that and pay attention to the apples.
Apple.
So we're going to use about 3 pounds of apples, like I said. And first we're going to start off with peeling them. Reagan's doing a great job.
Yeah, sure.
We're going to peel the apples and we're going to core the apples. So whenever they're done, they'll look like this. I'll probably get the rest of that off of there. And then we're going to dice them up and stick them into our crock pot here, along with some other spices and seasonings and sugar. Of course, gotta have a little bit of sugar in there. And then we will let this cook in the crock pot for about 12 hours. So the house should be smelling glorious, which is perfect because it is a nice fall feeling morning this morning. I think it was only like 61 degrees when we woke up, so our windows are wide open and the fans are running and it just is a happy day today. So we'll take you guys along with us getting this apple butter prepared and maybe you can make some at home yourself too. Okay, so we have successfully peeled and cored and diced all of our apples. We actually ended up with about 9 pounds of apples total. I went ahead back over to my mom's really fast to pick the rest of what I could off the tree that was ripe, and that gave us another 6 pounds to add to this recipe. So we've got them all in the crock pot, barely here. This is a 7-quart crock pot, I believe, and the lid is going to be barely sitting on top of all of this stuff, but as it cooks down it will shrink a little bit as the waters and juices come out. The recipe that I'm following, I'll put a link in the description below so you can follow it at home as well. In the recipe it calls for 6 pounds of apples and 1 cup of granulated sugar, 1 cup of brown sugar. Since we're doing 9 pounds of apples total, we're gonna do this recipe 1.5 times over. We actually use coconut sugar in place of the brown sugar. We don't usually use brown sugar here. Coconut sugar is low glycemic, so we usually keep that on hand, but we will be using some organic cane sugar as well. And I've just slightly cut that down a little bit. So I don't like to put the full amount of sugar in any recipe because I feel like a little bit goes a long way. So that's what we've added so far, is our 9 pounds of apples, and we've done about a cup of coconut sugar and a cup and a quarter of white granulated organic sugar. Okay, so next we're going to add about a tablespoon and a half of ground cinnamon. And just kind of liberally spread it over the top as evenly as you can. Like I said, as this cooks down, it'll be a lot easier to get in here with a spoon and mix things up. Next, we're going to add about half a teaspoon of nutmeg. This does call for freshly grated nutmeg, but we only have dry, so I'm gonna do just slightly less since dried seasonings are a little more potent than fresh. Next we have about half a teaspoon of ground cloves. Oh my goodness, the house is gonna smell so good. Then we're going to do a little bit more than a quarter teaspoon of salt. And then lastly, a tablespoon of pure vanilla extract. I don't know if I have quite that much, hopefully. Look at that. Exactly. Alright, so I'm not even going to attempt to mix or stir this up right now because it's just going to drop powdered ingredients everywhere and probably apple slices. So I'm just going to put the lid on it and go ahead and turn the crock pot on low. It says to cook for at least 10 hours, so I'll kind of keep an eye on it and gauge it maybe in an hour or two. Once the apples get a little soft and sweaty, then I can come back in and really incorporate those ingredients all throughout. So we'll check back in a little bit. Yes, my sink still has dishes in it, so please do not mind those. With all of the peels and apple cores that we have here, we're actually going to try something for the first time that we've never done before, but I've seen and heard that it's really easy to do, so we're going to give it a shot. But we're going to make some apple scrap vinegar, and all you do is just put about 3/4 of a jar, whatever size you want to do. I'm going to use one of these half-gallon jars. I'm going to put 3/4 of a jar with the scraps and the cores. I'm going to go ahead and give them a quick rinse before I put them in there, just in case there's any other dirt or anything that's left on them. So once we have the apple scraps in the jar about 3/4 high, we're going to make a sugar and water solution and pour until it covers the scraps. And we're going to leave a little bit of headspace in the jar so that while it's fermenting, if it grows or expands or anything like that, it won't explode the jar or overflow out of the jar. So I'm going to put this together real quick, and I will do a separate video on this, so be sure to check back in a couple weeks once it's all said and done so I can give you my full review on it. But I just wanted to let you guys know that you can use your apple scraps for something other than just tossing them out. You can put them in your compost or give to your animals if you have them, but we don't have them here at the townhouse, so we're going to make the best use of what we have when we have it. All right, we are about 4 to 5 hours into our slow cooking process. Let's give this all a stir. See how it's looking. Definitely starting to soften up. And there is liquid down in the bottom there. So the apples are starting to let off their juice. And it smells so good. I wish you could smell it. There's definitely some really soft pieces that have been in the bottom. in that liquid, so we want to give it a good stir so some of these tougher ones that are still on top can get down to the bottom and get some of that yummy flavor. Okay, lid back on. A few more hours to go. Alright, here we are. About 9-ish hours since we started our crock pot. And as you can see, the color and consistency is definitely changing. These apples are starting to break down as I'm stirring them. I've been stirring probably every 2 hours or so. But there are still some that have a little bit of crunch to them, I guess, just from being at the very tippy top, because we did stuff this crock pot super full. So I'm going to probably let this go another hour. We'll be getting to bed here shortly, so well, it is the next morning. I ended up leaving the apple butter in the crock pot all night because at about 10 o'clock last night, some of the apples were still just a little bit too tough. So I kept it on warm all night long so that way they could continue to break down but not overcook too much. And this morning I think the consistency is just right. So I'll get my immersion blender and just go through and puree it to the consistency that I like. But we're going to scoop a little bit of this on top of our oatmeal this morning as a topping. So we're going to leave some of the bigger apple chunks in it for a better texture with our oatmeal. And here's how it looks this morning. Probably not the best from your view because of the lighting, but it looks like apple butter and smells delicious. So you can see that the bigger pieces, as you stir them, are starting to fall apart, and that's really what we want. Alright, we are finally ready to can our apple butter. I found some jars at the storage unit, and I'm just boiling them here to sanitize them because they have been in storage. And next I'm going to puree our apple butter with my immersion blender until it's the right consistency. And once the jars are done being cleaned, I'll pull them out and funnel our apple butter in, and then we'll be ready to water bath can them. Alright, so there we have it. We have 9 pounds of apples, all condensed into 5.5 pint jars. So I've left about an inch of headspace on the top of these jars. I'm just going to wipe them down, wipe the rim, so there's no interference with the lid sealing on there correctly. And then I'm going to put the lids on them and the rings at finger tight. And then once my water is almost to a boil, we'll stick them in the canner and boil them for about 10 to 15 minutes. Okay, our jars are ready to go inside of the water bath canner, but I thought of a couple things I needed to throw in there really fast. The recipe actually called for putting the vanilla in only 2 hours before the apple butter was done in the crock pot. As you can see from the video, I put everything in the very beginning, so I don't think it affected the flavor whatsoever. We did have some on our oatmeal and it tasted great this morning, so I don't think that was a huge deal. But if for some reason you want to follow the directions correctly, that's what they call for. And then also, like I said, we did have some on our oatmeal, so this would have probably created maybe another half a pint altogether. So we probably would have gotten about 6 pints from 9 pounds of apples, just so you know. Okay, our water is just starting to simmer a little bit, so right before a boil. So I'm gonna go ahead and put our jars inside and let it keep raising up so it doesn't shock our jars too much. Just slowly lower them into the water. You want to have a good inch of water over the lids of your jars. So if there's not enough when you stick them in there, go ahead and add some more so that it will help your lids to seal properly. And once this reaches a rapid boil, then we'll start our timer for 10 minutes. If you wanted to do larger jars of this, such as quart jars, your timing would have to go up a little bit, maybe 15-20 minutes, but do your research on that, don't quote me. But I know the bigger the jar, the longer the processing time. But for our pint-sized jars, 10 to 15 minutes is usually sufficient at a rapid boil. So we're gonna let these come up to a boil, put the lid on, and start our timer, and then we'll check back in. Okay, so we are now at a good rolling boil. So we're going to start our timer for 10 minutes and cover them up, and that's it for now. Okay, so it has been 10 minutes that our jars have been at a rapid boil with this closed lid water bath. We're going to switch the heat off on the burner and just let them sit for about an additional 10 minutes until the temperature comes down a little bit, so that way the jars don't go through too much shock pulling them out of the boiling hot water into the cool air. Alright, so our jars have came down in temperature. We've let them sit for a little more than 10 minutes. So we were busy doing other things, but these should be good and ready to come out and cool on the counter. So when you take them out, you want to put them in a place that you don't plan to disturb them. They need to sit flat in the same spot for about 12 hours. So very carefully we remove and set on a towel here on our counter. Give them some good spacing from each other. they can cool properly. So as you can hear, our jar lids are popping, which is a good sign. That means that they are sealing to the jar, and the change in temperature is what does that to them. So we're gonna let these cool down for 12 hours, like I said, and then we'll come back and write dates on the lids and remove the rings here. Sometimes you can get a false seal if you leave your ring on for too long. So after the 12 hours, I'll remove the rings and kind of lift by the lid to see if they've attached to the jars. If they haven't, just stick that jar in your refrigerator and use it first. Otherwise, these other ones can sit on your shelf for upwards to 6 months to a year, and I've heard people going even longer than that, but I'm not sure how long only 5.5 pints of apple butter will last. So that is it for apple butter and how to can it. I hope this was informative to you, and if you have any questions about this recipe, please leave them in the comments below. I will put the recipe link in the description below if you want to make this at home, and I hope you enjoy. We'll see you next time.